our health, it's going to depend on the health of the world around us. And it's also going to be dependent on the health of our food supply chain, which brings me to this rise of the avian flu, because I think that's leading us into this really challenging space. This is going to be the second episode in a docuseries on the rise of the avian flu. And in this episode, I'm going to question, how did it get so deadly? Because it has gotten really deadly over a very short amount of time. So let me just review this first, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how is this avian flu spreading to so many mammals, and then I'm going to talk about what happened to our immune system when we started introducing COVID, and when we especially started introducing the vaccines. Then I'm going to question, could the mammals that are susceptible to COVID, could they be experiencing the same things that we as humans experience? And then lastly, we're just going to try and wrap it all up and look at how it has been impacting some of the mammals and some of the wildlife across the globe, because I think you're going to find that it's not being talked about in the news, and it's actually gotten much more deadly than it was when it first came out. So in my last episode, I talked about the poultry farm in Israel. It's a corporate farm. They had an outbreak of avian flu. And this avian flu, Israel noted that it was really so much more deadly than they had ever experienced before. Now, there's research that says that we push COVID into our livestock and into our poultry. In chickens especially, it shows that high density populations of chicken, but also high density populations of people can cause the push of some sort of virus into chickens. And Israel is the highest populated country in the world. They were also one of the first countries to do a campaign of mandatory mRNA vaccines. And what scientists found is that animals that had ACE2 receptors similar to human ACE2 receptors, they're going to be most susceptible to COVID-19. So mice, hamsters, rats, cats, horses, bears, seals, sea lions. It's this really large group of mammals. And what they found also is that humans that were shedding the virus or shedding in farms and in zoos, that they were infecting the animals with COVID. What we find is we're the ones that are passing COVID-19 to these mammals, and we're infecting them. And over the next few years, these mammals are going to be exposed to all sorts of various strains of this COVID-19, all sorts of mutations of COVID-19. They're going to be exposed to all that spike protein from the jabs, the shedding of the nanoparticles, and what kind of impact is that going to have on their immune system? The first time we see this more dangerous strain of avian flu is in 2021, right? And yet by early 2022, this Eurasian strain of H5N1, this is a clade. That's a clade. And that clade of avian flu is all over the globe. It spreads like wildfire. And mammals of this are showing up with this strain, this H5N1 from this clade in the United States and across the globe. So how did they get this avian flu so quickly? Did they all eat some infected bird? One of the things that's interesting is Thomas Gillespie is a disease ecologist at Emory University. What he said is, you know what? There's very little surveillance of wildlife for any of the diseases. With wildlife, it's really hard to know if it's mammal to mammal spread or if it's individual events. Okay, so we're not studying this. We're just making assumptions. And the narrative on the news and social media has been that these animals ate an infected host or an infected dead bird. But here's the thing, the more you see of avian flu, the more it appears there has to be more possible causes than eating this infected host it's eating this infected host, getting sick, and then spreading it to your same species. I've been saying that, our immune system, it's gone through some profound changes over the last couple of years. And whether that's from COVID-19 or whether that's from the vaccinations, that's another one where we would have to do a bit more research to narrow that down and to really understand which one is it, or is it both of them? It seems like over the last couple years, our immune system, they've gone through this really profound change, and many of us are more susceptible to everything. Why am I saying this? Can I justify this with anything? Well, there's a lot of statistics that's starting to support this. I did an episode called The Silent Crisis of Increasing Cancer and Mortality in Young Adults. So this is going over the excess deaths in 2021 and 2022. And what we're seeing is they were something like 8% in 2021, and then they went up to 9% in 2022. And I haven't looked at 2023, but it appears that they're still high. Some people are saying the heart disease is still climbing and that the cancer rates are still climbing. I haven't looked at it because, guess what? Super depressing, right? Because no one is asking why those rates are suddenly so high. That's just those statistics. But what if we just kind of look at the diseases that are happening right now? So end of 2021, remember that was the first outbreak of that RSV in children here in the United States. So the pediatric hospital wards are suddenly completely full, and kids are hideously sick and kids are dying. So they found that to be RSV. The thing is that RSV's been around for like 50 years and it hasn't caused that before. So why did it suddenly become so toxic? What had changed in either the virus or in these kids' immune system that made them so much more susceptible to this? And there's a lot more things that have the same questions attached to them. Chronic fatigue has taken huge jumps. I talk about this on my website, best-acupuncture.com, and individuals reporting symptoms of long COVID. 4-month period, it jumped 3%. So between October 2023 to January 2024, this brief period, it had a huge jump. June 2023, I have an episode on the human metapneumonia virus. It really upset me because all of a sudden we have this huge hospitalization rate in 2023. It's not COVID. And what they're saying is that it was human metapneumonia virus. And I thought, wow, really? Because that's been around forever and it's usually asymptomatic. So now they're testing for it. For some reason, they're testing for it. And they're saying that there's a 30% increase in this virus. And this illness is lasting for 2 months or longer. And some people are going septic with it. So an asymptomatic virus that is usually a cofactor in most of the illnesses. Suddenly they're testing for it and they're saying that's why we're ending up in the hospital and dying in June of 2023. If we look at 2023 in China, so this is the year after we had that RSV surge in children, China is suddenly seeing an increase in hospitalizations and deaths in their kids under 5, and they find that it's a pneumonia RSV thing. So why did China suddenly become more susceptible to this? This year is 2024. Japan has a strep A infection that is planned to triple this year. It's toxic shock syndrome. And even though it's going to triple, that it's not a pandemic, but it is notable that a lot more people are getting toxic shock syndrome. Here's the thing. the year before, the UK, France, and Spain had these severe strep infections that were causing things like scarlet fever. It's kind of weird how these things are like doing waves over the globe. Now, this year, I talk about on my website the weird allergy season that we're having. And I talk about it in Health Hub too, and some of the things that we're doing that you can do to help with the hideous allergies that are happening. But the allergies are so much worse than they've ever been. There's also been an influenza B that has been knocking people on their butt. Influenza B is supposed to be the mild flu, not a bad deal. Little nausea, little stomach upset, everybody's fine. This can put you flat on your back of vomiting. So bizarre, huh? For some reason, we are seeing an impact in our immune system, and it seems like people are becoming more susceptible to anything that can affect their immune system. And each year, it seems to be getting worse. So right now, the statistics are suggesting that it's getting worse, it's not getting better, and that makes me wonder what could cause that. And that makes me wonder, is it impacting more than just humans? Could that same experience be happening in our wildlife populations? So did their exposure to COVID-19 or to the spike protein from the jabs or to the nanoparticles from the jab, did that create an underlying weakness in their immune system that makes them more susceptible to certain diseases, especially something like an H5N1 disease like the avian flu? Okay, what about which mammals are getting sick with COVID-19? And the research is going to say that the mammals with H2 receptors for the spike protein to attach to. Okay, so they just need to have exposure to the spike protein. And where's the spike protein? Well, it's on the virus, it's in the air, it's inside the lipid nanoparticle. One of the things that we do to monitor COVID is wastewater levels. And until just recently, until like April of 2024, those levels were really high. And there was these interesting things that were happening in wastewater. Some wastewater was off the charts, and they could literally pull that back to one super spreader. And so you don't need a lot of people to make super high levels of COVID-19 in the water. All you need is a super spreader. So wastewater. And we have treated sewage going into the oceans, and we have untreated sewage going into the ocean. Along the Southern California border, it's just south of San Diego, there's been a lot of concern raised because Mexico has been dumping raw sewage into the ocean. And over the last 5 years, so throughout the full pandemic, they've dumped like 100 billion gallons of wastewater into the ocean. And this is completely untreated sewage. And in June of 2023, there's a story that comes out that we're having a problem with sea lions in San Diego, that they've become very aggressive. And in June of 2023, hundreds of sea lions have died, and about 60 dolphins. They find about 60 dolphins that have died. One of the things that's happening is there's this really large toxic bloom of algae off the coast of San Diego. And this bloom loves to grow in nitrogen-rich waters, which could be from that sewage spill happening just south of them. Now, the sea lions that died and the dolphins that died, their deaths, it's going to be blamed on this algae bloom. I want to go to John Warner. He's a CEO of the Marine Mammal Care Center. It's a nonprofit rescue organization that serves Los Angeles County. And what he said is that none of this has been researched. So these seals, sea lions, these dolphins dying, none of this has been researched. and definitively pointed to that I'm aware of. But putting two to two together, when you have this really large algae bloom, it's pretty easy to connect the dots in a way that we're comfortable assuming that these are obviously connected incidents. And that seems really reasonable. You have this really toxic algae bloom out there, and no one's really talking about the high mortality rates that's happening in mammals in the ocean. And no one's really wondering about, is COVID, is the spike protein from the jabs or the nanoparticles from the jabs, is that impacting these sea lions? So, but I'm wondering, dumping billions of pounds of raw sewage with high levels of COVID-19 and spike protein and nanoparticles, could these sea lions, could these dolphins actually have been infected with COVID-19 and died from COVID-19? We're not going to know right now, but it's something to think about, because if that happened in Southern California, think about all the other areas where we're dumping wastewater into the oceans. Even if it's treated, when we're talking about nanoparticles, there is nothing that we can treat that can remove nanoparticles from our wastewater. So let's say that now we're infecting a large group of mammals that are susceptible to the spike protein because they have an ACE2 receptor. And this is in wild sea life. So let's go back to H5N1. We have a much more susceptible group. Let's just postulate that now, like humans, this group is more susceptible to any other type of diseases out there. Well, here's the thing. We don't hear about this because our news doesn't do any news, right? But in Valdez Peninsula in Argentina, Patagonia, that has the only breeding colony of elephant seals. And this one island usually has about 16,000 elephant seals. When the researchers went to count the seals in 2023, in December of 2023, when they got to the island, it was quiet. All they saw was dead sea elephants and dead pups. There was just a few hundred sea elephants left on the beach. Now, they estimate that maybe 96% of the sea elephant pups died in this breeding season, and they're not sure how many of the adult sea elephants died. They're going to have to wait until 2024 and go back out and try to count them again. So one of the things that they're talking about is ecological collapse. And when one species collapses, it starts a ripple effect that can ripple throughout not just the oceans. That ripple effect will go throughout the world. And that is their biggest concern with this H5N1. So when they tested the carcasses of the dead sea elephants, what they found is H5N1. And we haven't done enough study to really identify, was their immune system compromised by something else? Did COVID, did the nanoparticles, what all caused this H5N1 to become so toxic to sea elephants? Oh, here's a little trivia. Do you know that H5N1 can live for 30 days in water if the temperature is under 68 degrees Fahrenheit, or which is 28 degrees Celsius, which is almost all year round in Argentina? So it's not just these sea elephants that are experiencing colony collapse. They've reported that in Chile and Peru, they have over 20,000 sea lions that have died from this H5N1. And I just want to bring you back to when this first was released in 2021. So this avian flu, it first appeared in Israel in 2021 after some large-scale corporate poultry farm fed wild cranes grain that was infected with H5N1 from this poultry farm. Now, that first outbreak, 20% of the wild cranes died. So just 2.5 years later, this avian flu is all over the globe, and we're seeing it threatening colony collapse in certain wildlife populations. And so one of the other populations that they've looked at in 2023 is a bird population, the gannet population in Scotland. They nest on the shorelines there, and they estimate that 71% of the population died this last year. 71%. That is so much more than 20%. And can they survive another mutation of whatever this H5N1 virus is? Something happened to H5N1 in 2021 that made this avian flu so much more flexible and so much more lethal. And this flexibility is allowing it access to all these species and making it so much more contagious, not just within a species, but to all species. And it seems to be to species that are particularly susceptible to COVID-19. And that's what captures my attention, is that the characteristics of this avian flu, some of the characteristics are really those of the COVID-19 spike protein. You know, its ability to mutate. There's an episode out here. I'll put a link to it. But I go over the 5 characteristics of the spike protein that made it so unique. One of the things that this avian flu is doing is similar to the spike protein. Its flexibility, its ability to mutate, how lethal it is. And that it's attacking the lungs in the sea lions, in the elephant seals, in cougars, in the bears. And like COVID-19, even though it's all COVID-19, it doesn't jump into some other type of coronavirus. It stays within its group, but within that group, it has a lot of mutations. It has a lot of genetic drifts. It moves between species. It moves from one member to another member easily. So this avian flu has picked up characteristics that it really didn't have before. It had potential, but it really didn't have this level of flexibility. So when COVID-19 happened, you know, most of the scientists thought that it was unlikely that the spike protein could have made all these really precise, lethal modifications in that spike protein in nature. And they thought it needed some help. So that spike protein loves playing with other infections like the flu and the cold. So that gave it a high probability of co-infections. So if you look at that, if you look at the high probability of co-infections, the pressure being put on that chicken farm in Israel from a high density population that had a high vaccine rate, which meant that now there hasn't been any research right now on shedding, but it seems reasonable that they were shedding a whole lot more spike protein than a normal infection, because the research shows that people who have been vaccinated have a whole lot more spike protein than a natural infection. So if we look at all of that, I wonder if this avian flu incorporates a piece of the spike protein. Okay, so there it is, you guys. Here we have some thoughts on, you know, what's going on with this avian flu. It's gotten really bad, and maybe we need to start putting a lot of effort into understanding it, because if scientists are saying that there's a risk for colony collapse and ecological collapse, that is just another way that our ability to survive on this planet has been shortened dramatically. Who knows? Okay, until next time, I'll catch you on the other side.